A lot of games get announced and we say, wow, that looks great. Really cool idea. This could really be something good. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 games with the most wasted potential. Starting off with number 10, it's Red Dead Online. RDR2 was and still is one of the biggest and most important open world games of all time, but if you looked into how Rockstar has treated the online mode, you'd think it was a failure. It wasn't, though. As of November 2022, it had sold 46 million copies, one of the best-selling games of all time. So you'd think it'd have a pretty thriving online community, but missteps from Rockstar combined with overall neglect means that the online portion of the game is more like a ghost town, which is a real shame, because Red Dead Online is pretty great, and it could have been a lot more. Like so much more. But instead of trying to foster the community and add features to draw in more players, Rockstar basically gave up on the mode and dedicated all their time and the insane money to their machine that already makes tons of money, which is Grand Theft Auto Online. The sad truth is that Red Dead Online was never going to be as popular or make the kind of money that GTA Online did. Like a slow cowboy game can't sell you stuff in the way an over-the-top crime game can, but that doesn't mean they had to give up on it. The story of Rockstar's mismanagement of Red Dead Online is a really long one. Even for people who still play it and really like it, it's hard to get over the fact that the whole thing could have been so much better if they just put the time and resources into it, but they didn't. At number 9 is Anthem. Yep, Anthem. I almost feel like I have to remind people what Anthem even is. Like, it's a game that came and went so fast, it's super easy to forget about. Like, it's a third-person shooter, you fly around in an Iron Man suit. BioWare, yes, that BioWare made it. It was loaded with live service crap, and they gave up on it in less than a year. It failed hard, but it's not like it was destined to suck. It was a new IP, set in a potentially interesting world, and the mix of flying and combat really could have been a lot of fun. But like a lot of BioWare games, this game suffered a really rough development cycle. Like, sometimes their games come together real good after a rough development cycle, like Dragon Age Inquisition, and Anthem is an example of when they don't. The thing about Anthem is that nothing really fits together. The loot system's super basic. You can't really customize the character. Builds were barely a thing. Story was linear and dull. And worst of all, the flying, which was like one of the main selling points of the game, felt tacked on. You basically used it to go from point A to point B, and that's about it. But I don't think BioWare really knew what they were trying to do. I mean, management literally told people never to mention Destiny while designing the game. They didn't want to copy it, but in the end, they made a lot of the same mistakes Destiny made and had fixed by that point. And as a result, their game really never got a chance, and it's mostly just forgotten about. At number 8 is Watch Dogs Legion. Originally, I was going to put the original Watch Dogs on here, but honestly, it's the third one that had the most wasted potential. Like, the first one never managed to reach its visual or narrative potential, but in terms of gameplay, it was pretty good. Sequel, fantastic. It's one of the best open world action games ever. And while the third isn't terrible, it could have been a lot more. I'm talking primarily about the very vaunted Legion system, where there's no quote-unquote main character. Instead, you just play as anyone, which is a cool idea, but the implementation was really weak. At the end of the day, you were basically just using a character creator that only let you hit the random button. Like, that's really what this ended up being. Instead of playing as a defined character with motives, a personality, and a unique model, you played as an ugly NPC with a limited selection of abilities that didn't make the game more interesting. It just made it so you had to swap between a few characters every once in a while. Apparently, the system was a lot more in-depth and interesting at first, but they play tested it into oblivion and took out basically everything that would have made it unique, and that ended up making it into just another Ubisoft open world game, but with a barely talking protagonists, I guess. Not exactly the revolutionary experience they made it seem like it was going to be. At number 7 is Mass Effect Andromeda, and I don't want to pick on BioWare here. Like, but seriously? So, new Mass Effect game set an entirely new universe, slate wiped clean, more about exploration rather than an increasingly narrow scope of focus on action. Should have been awesome. Wasn't. What was supposed to be an entire new galaxy got condensed down to a few planets, and while that could have worked, it was mostly just painfully dull, paint-by-numbers open world crap. Vehicles were back, and that was cool, but you barely got to use them for anything other than driving through these really painfully dull dull planets doing busy work. Outside of the open world, there are some positives. The combat is a lot more vertical and dynamic, and wow, is it ever good? But again, this game was supposed to focus on exploration rather than narrowing down on action. So the thing that they improved upon wasn't the focus. And as you know, Mass Effect has a real complicated story where things that you do have big effects. But instead of using the clean slate they had apparently given themselves, they kind of just transported all the same grudges from the last galaxy to the new galaxy. On top of that, companions are pretty forgettable. The two new aliens really aren't that interesting. And the whole premise of colonizing a new galaxy basically gets thrown out in the first few minutes. There was so much potential here. Like, it could have been an amazing new trilogy instead of a single mediocre game. And they've announced Mass Effect 4, so that's what we got, a single mediocre game in the Andromeda Galaxy. At number 6 is Castlevania Lord of Shadows 2. The Castlevania games were awesome. The originals on the Nintendo are all-time classics. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was one of the best games ever, and the Game Boy Advance and DS games continued the legacy in a positive way. They were all 2D, though. This series just never quite got to that same standard when they went to 3D. Probably the best it ever got was the first Castlevania Lord of Shadows. It was a reboot that was a pretty good starting place, but didn't have a lot of the classic monsters, and the music, not quite there. There's really good music in the Castlevania series, and not in Lord of Shadows. The sequel could have been amazing if it took everything good about the first game and worked in stuff from the classic games, but what we got was a bizarrely bad sequel that kind of just doubled down on the worst parts of the first game. Combat is somehow clunkier. There is a bizarre focus on stealth, and if anything, the world is even more disconnected from the classic games. Story is a mess, which is a shame because it had a pretty intriguing promise that it mostly squanders. Dracula in the modern day would be awesome, and I admit there's some pretty cool visuals in the modern day parts at times, but it doesn't work. These days, the best 3D Castlevania games are just Souls-likes. Like, they don't really play anything like Castlevania, but the Souls games kind of have that right spooky atmosphere and challenging gameplay. All they really need is a wicked soundtrack. Someday we will get a good 3D Castlevania game, but it seems like it's gonna be a while because this game bombed bad. At number 5 is The Order 1886. Speaking of games with great settings and atmosphere, The Order 1886 really could have been one of Sony's big new franchises if it didn't stumble right out of the gate with a kind of forgettable first entry. It's a game with a cool concept. You play as an immortal warrior taking on supernatural threats in a visually interesting steampunk world, but the actual gameplay left something to be desired. I don't want to call it a snooze because I like it, and also resident The Order 1886 defender Jake Baldino really liked it, but it's also not really that different from your standard first-person shooter. The main twist is that sometimes the guns are pretty interesting, but the environments are small, the story's kind of predictable, and the game is very short. You're immortal, it's steampunk, and there's supernatural stuff, except there's not really a whole lot of supernatural stuff. You fight like 2 werewolves in the game. The moment that the story gets interesting, it basically sequel teases you. Like, that's the end. Sorry, the princess is in another castle, and you'll never see that castle because we made this castle way too short and kind of generic at times, and nobody's gonna buy the next castle. Like, it has all of the makings of a cool action game in a unique setting, and if it wasn't a $60 game, if it was like a $20 game, I think it would have been remembered differently. So at $60, it's basically a competent tech demo for PS4 that still looks good now. Like, just to be clear, look at this game. It looks beautiful. That looks like a fairly recent game, honestly. And that's from the beginning of the PS4 cycle. It's not terrible. It's not even like there's any major problems. It's just not enough. At number 4 is Artifact. Looking back at it now, Artifact seems kind of destined to fail. But when it first came out, it seemed like it could be really big. Digital card games were at an all-time high. Valve announced they're making a new game with Richard Garfield, who created Magic the Gathering. Sounded like a license to print money. Wasn't at all. Like, far from it. What makes it so wasted is that the actual game design is pretty cool and interesting. It's a cross between a card game and a MOBA. Like, it was doing something that was just a little bit too complicated in a real card game. And I think the problem was it really wasn't that fun to play. Like, a lot of the design is clever, but that doesn't make it fun. And then Valve was real slow on making some changes to keep players around. They take a slow and steady game design that is not cut out for live service games like this. Like, people needed to know what's going on, what they're doing, where it's going, how long it's going to be, and Valve just barely talked. If they'd been a little more responsive and been a little more flexible about what the game would be, also maybe made monetization that wasn't easy as hell to hate, Artifact could have been probably a huge name in digital card games, and now it's kind of more of a punchline. At number 3 is Hello Neighbor, a game most people agree has a great premise. It's like combining Home Alone with Rear Window. You play as a kid investigating the house of your creepy neighbor. The whole goal of it is to sneak in, find out what he's up to, but the whole time he's hunting you like a less threatening xenomorph, adapting to what you do and learning, and allegedly forces you to find new ways of sneaking around him. It's clever, but anybody who's ever played it agrees that while it starts off pretty good, it slowly gets worse with each new build that they put out. The clever AI aspects of the game were downplayed and the more tedious parts became the focus, which is bizarre because while it's relatively popular, most reviews from people who've actually played it are not great. This game could have been a more intense version of Alien Isolation with its AI programming, but it never turned out to be that. At number 2 is Epic Mickey. Before Epic Mickey came out, this game had some major hype behind it. It was a War Inspector game set in a weird and dark alternate version of Disney. It's by the creator of Deus Ex, and its Disney stuff seems stranger and darker than pretty much everything we've ever seen from the company. It can't be understated how interesting those first pieces of concept art were and what they hinted at, but what we got was not even close to that. We were kind of expecting a post-apocalyptic Disney Deus Ex, but got a less good Okami with all of the edges filed off. Epic Mickey was just a safe, pretty by-the-numbers platformer. There were some ruins there and a few things that kind of looked like the concept art if you squinted a little, but by and large, it was the Disney we all knew and were kind of sick of by that point. Yeah, those first concepts were never going to be the actual game, especially one actually paid for by Disney, but it's still a missed opportunity, even if realistically, what we got was exactly what we should have expected. And at number 1 is Spore, game with limitless potential and so much of it wasted. So much. This was another game with like astronomical hype. I mean, we're talking about a thing that was going to simulate an entire lifespan of a species, not a creature, like a race of things. You start at a cellular level and reach all the way to ruling a galactic empire. That's the scale that we were talking about. But it was a game that was as wide as an ocean, but with the depth of a puddle. Each evolutionary step was basically a small mini game with almost no depth to it, and it really did not take long for players to get bored. These days, it's not uncommon for games to come out that are fairly light on content and eventually become great years after, like No Man's Sky or Sea of Thieves, but Spore kind of came out in 2008, and while it made a lot of money, it wasn't making The Sims money, so it really never got the chance to grow into something more complex and interesting. The technology was there, the way you could create creatures and evolve them was pretty great, but it needed more. The expansions and updates never materialized either, leaving us with a game that's kind of fun to mess around with, but could have been a lot more. A quick bonus for you too, Shenmue 3. For years it seemed like the Shenmue series was done, but in 2015, 14 years after Shenmue 2, Yu Suzuki came back to promote a Kickstarter, and it was a huge success. Finally, after all these years, fans could see the conclusion to the epic saga. It took another 4 years to make the game, but in 2019, people got their hands on it, and basically nothing happens. You don't fight the bad guy, the plot barely moves forward, and pretty much nothing happens. This was Yu Suzuki's one chance to finally wrap the game up, or at least end it in a satisfying way, but it ends on a tease for a sequel where the actual plot will be. It was very frustrating. Was it the worst thing ever? No, but yeah, it was fun to do some more Shenmue stuff, but it didn't go anywhere, and it was supposed to be the thing that finished it all off. That's frustrating now.
And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on GameRanx.